Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV. We are live once again. Today's topic is the real story of the War of the Vendee. To call into the show during live broadcasting to ask a question or comment, please dial +1 785 672 9560. That is +1 785 672 9560. We welcome again Brother Alexis Bonello to the show.
Thank you, AJ. It's always glad to be on Order Militaris Radio TV, breaking new horizons in Catholic independent media in the English-speaking world. And this is a wonderful apostolate of our order, and I encourage everyone to support Order Militaris Radio TV so we can keep bringing you programs and pay the bills.
Yep. Let's see. So, what is the section of France known as the Vendee?
Vendee, V-E-N-D-E-E, with the first E with an X on it. So in France, if you're looking at a map of France, it has kind of like an arm that sticks out there on the west side. That's Brittany. South of Brittany, there's a big river that flows into the Atlantic called the Loire. And just south of that, there's a little region called the Vendee. And it was a part of France, of the Kingdom of France, that was held directly up from the king. So the king was the direct overlord. There was no Duke of the Vendee or Count of the Vendee. And very Catholic region of France. It had been evangelized by Saint Louis Marie Montfort, who about 70 years before the French Revolution, Catholics were very devoted to Our Lady, to our Lord, to the Catholic faith. The nobility were some of the best in all of France. They lived with their people. They were kind. They were not cruel. It's mostly a rural area. There are a few cities. The cities of Nantes is really the biggest city in the region, and it's far from France. Even today, it's an extremely devout Catholic area. You can find a national passion play that they perform there, and they support a lot of religious orders. Have always had in their families lots of vocations to the priesthood and to religious life. If most people don't know anything about Loire, but if you're visiting France and you're Catholic, you want to go to the Vendee, because that is the Catholic heartland of France, more so than any other part that's kept the faith.
Before we get into the civil constitution of the clergy of 12th of July 1790 that the new French Republic forced the clergy to swear, there's two terms that'll be coming up: juring clergy and non-juring clergy. What are they?
So the godless, atheistic, Masonic French Revolution, which wasn't, I should say, the godless, atheistic Masonic Revolution that called itself the French Revolution, sought to destroy the entire order of France, all the nobility, the church, the Christian faith, the whole social order, and create a new Masonic state. And impose the Masonic religion on France. So they had to destroy the Catholic Church, and they took away the lands. They passed the law so the church couldn't raise any funds from its lands. They abolished the tithe. They appropriated all the land of the church. That's about 1/6 of all the property in the church they stole. It's still stolen, and they never gave it back. And they then wanted to take control of the priesthood by forcing them to become agents of the new religion of the state. So they had to swear an oath of loyalty to the Masonic Republic. And those who swore were called juring, and those who refused to swear were called non-juring. So that's what juring, and because juring from the Latin to swear an oath is jurare in Latin. So the ones who swore an oath to the Masonic government and apostatized and became heretics were called juring clergy, and those who remain Catholic and refuse to swear are the non-juring clergy.
This is the actual text of this Constitution. They were forced to swear. The National Assembly, having heard the report of its ecclesiastical committee, has decreed and does decree the following as constitutional articles. Title I of Ecclesiastical Offices. Each and every department shall constitute a single diocese, and each and every diocese shall have the same extent and limits as the department. The episcopal sees of the 83 departments of the kingdom shall be established as follows. All bishoprics in the 83 departments of the kingdom that are not included by name in the present article are and shall forever remain suppressed. The kingdom shall be divided in 10 metropolitan districts, the seats of which shall be Rouen, Reims, Pont, Reims, Paris, Bourges, Bordeaux, Toulouse, Aix, and Lyon. The metropolitan sees shall have the following denominations: Rouen, Channel Coast; Reims, Northeast; Brescan, the East; Rennes, Northwest; Paris, Bourges, Center; Bordeaux, Southwest; Toulouse, South; Aix, Mediterranean Coast; and Lyon, Southeast. No church or parish of France and no French citizen may, under any circumstances or on any pretext whatsoever, acknowledge the authority of an ordinary bishop or archbishop whose see is established under the name of a foreign power, or that of its delegates residing in France or elsewhere, without prejudice, however, to the unity of faith and communion, which shall be maintained with the visible head of the universal church as hereinafter provided. When the diocesan bishop in his synod has pronounced a decision on matters within his competence, appeal may be brought to the archbishop, who shall make his decision in the metropolitan synod. A new organization and division of all parishes of the kingdom shall be undertaken immediately upon the advice of the diocesan bishop and district administrations. The number and extent thereof shall be determined according to the rules to be established. The cathedral church of each and every diocese shall be restored to its original status by the suppression of parishes and the redistribution of dwellings which it is deemed suitable to unite thereto, and it shall be or one at the same time the parochial and episcopal church. The episcopal parish shall have no other immediate pastor than the bishop. All priests established therein shall be his vicars, and shall perform the duties thereof. There shall be 16 vicars of the cathedral church in cities of more than 10,000 inhabitants, but only 12 where the population is fewer than 10,000 inhabitants. In each and every diocese, one seminary only shall be preserved or established for preparation for orders, without intending any prejudice for the present with regard to other houses of instruction and education. The seminary shall be established near the cathedral church whenever possible, even within the precincts of the buildings and intended for the dwelling of the bishop. For the direction and instruction of young pupils received into the seminary, there shall be a superior vicar and 3 directing vicars subordinate to the bishop. The superior and directing vicars shall be required to be present with young ecclesiastics of the seminary at all offices of the cathedral parish, and to perform therein all duties with which the bishop or his first vicar shall see fit to entrust. It goes on and on and on.
So it's the complete power grab by the Masonic government of the church. They're going to tell the Catholics everything from where their dioceses are, where their bishops are, and how they're going to run it. I mean, they're basically replacing canon law with their own law. Can you imagine? This is a revolution that claims liberty, equality, and fraternity for everyone. I guess except Catholics. They forgot to add the phrase, except Catholics.
it tells you where you can have a diocese, and those that are not on the list are suppressed. You can only have so many vicar priests, you can only have so many bishops, so many whatever. It's just
Mhm.
crazy.
The Constitution, so the government completely wanted to replace canon law and take complete control of the church. They're doing to the Catholic Church in France what Henry VIII did to the Catholic Church in England, a complete power grab and theft. And this is why the French state today is still illegal and still unjust. Because, so they're talking about 83 dioceses, I think they mentioned in that Constitution. You know how many dioceses are left in France today?
Mm-mm.
Not, I think there's like a dozen or something. There was a plan to reduce it to 4 some years ago. That's how much they've destroyed the church in France. That's how few believers there are left in the whole country. Because Catholics in that age did not resist the revolution as was their duty before God, except in the Vendee. In the Vendee, we see Catholics doing their duty. We see a whole society of the true faith and how it should respond to a Masonic revolution.
Why did Vendée not accept juring clergy, and what did Saint Louis de Montfort tell them to do?
So the juring clergy were heretics, they're apostates, they're agents of the government, they're turncoats, they're traitors, and they're what more can you say? A priest like that's not a priest. You don't want him anywhere near you, and you certainly don't want him to perform the sacraments. So the Catholics of the Vendée rejected juring priests and would not consider them even Catholic. And this is a wonderful example to us today because the Mass has a certain form and there's certain rubrics. The state has no authority to tell Catholic priests how to celebrate the Mass. Those who allow the state to tell them how to say the Mass are juring priests. Worse, they're doing even without an oath. They're doing it voluntarily.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't regard clergy like that as Catholic. They're not in communion with the church. They've committed apostasy, okay? Because they've rejected Christ as head of the church and they've accepted Masonic government as head of the church, okay? Catholics should never accept clergy like that. And some people don't realize how evil they are, okay? And St. Louis de Montfort had preached to the people about the importance to be loyal to Jesus Christ and really put your faith into practice. It cannot be something that's only on your lips. You have to live it because the end times are coming and our faith is going to be put to test. And this is one reason why the Vendée was so prepared and ready to act, because they had this great apostle, St. Louis de Montfort. They were all consecrated to Our Lady. It was very common devotion there. And so they had the grace to act. They weren't living in sin and they weren't living in despair. They were humble, faithful Catholics, law-abiding individuals until these crazy things broke out and they realized the government can no longer be respected. They're going to remain loyal to their king and to their God.
Yeah. What comes next is was the September massacres. What were they?
So the French government, the revolution was very unstable, and there was one reign of terror after another. But at one point, they started forcing the priests to sign the civil constitution. Those who refused were arrested and put to death. They passed a law saying that if you didn't swear to the constitution, you could be killed on sight, okay, by anyone. So that's absolutely outrageous. Several hundred clergy were guillotined. During the reign of terror between 1793 1794, tens of thousands of people were beheaded by guillotine. At that point, it became pretty clear that the government is not going to dialogue. See, when you have a government that has its own alternate reality of the world, and you show them the facts that they're wrong, that you have rights, and they refuse to listen and refuse to change, what they're saying is that you're not a human being because I don't have to regard you as a person who have any rights anymore. So as soon as the government goes off and with its own alternate reality and refuses to listen to the people, then you're in a very dangerous situation, because what they're telling you by their silence and refusal of dialogue and refusal to accept the facts is that they're very capable of killing you, because they no longer regard you as a human being or as an equal or as anyone with rights. So the reign of terror, the guillotining of the clergy, the arrest of the clergy, the destruction of the church, all this showed that the Masonic government wasn't about liberty, equality, fraternity, not for anything. That's complete lie. It's about establishing the Masonic religion, which is still the religion of France, because the French Catholics did not rise up en masse to defend themselves. They were allowed themselves to be seduced, except in the Vendee. In the Vendee, they knew what the faith was, and they took a stand. And we'll see now an extremely heroic series of events, which will be sung by true Catholics until the end of time for what they did, what they tried to do, even though in the end they were defeated.
You're listening live to Order Militaris Radio TV on the air at ordo-militaris.net. That is ordo-militaris.net. And today's topic, we are speaking about the real story of the War of the Vendee. And we're getting ready to speak about a general decree of 4th of February, 1793, which reads, the National Convention, having heard the report of its legislative committee on the method of bringing into effect its decree of last 12 August, decreeing the following. Article 1. Immediately after publication of this decree, all suspect people who are to be found on the territory of the Republic and who are still in freedom will be put under arrest. 2. Consider as suspects people are those who, either by their conduct or their relation or by their words or writing, have shown themselves to be partisans of tyranny or federalism and the enemies of freedom. Those who cannot justify in the manner prescribed by the decree of last 21st of March their means of existence and their acquittal of their civic duty. Those to whom have been denied certificates of good citizenship. Fourth, public officials who have been suspended or discharged from their functions by the National Convention or its commissioners and have not been reinstated, notably those who have been or ought to be discharged under the law of last 14th August. Those former nobles with their husbands, wives, fathers, mothers, sons or daughters, brothers or sisters, agents of immigrants who have not consistently demonstrated their commitment to the revolution, and those who have immigrated during the interval between 1st July 1789 and the publication of the law of 8 April 1792, even they have returned to France within the time prescribed by that law or earlier.
So basically it's a decree to completely wipe out the entire opposition. It's a purge, and once arrested, you probably ended up dead or executed. So notice that they listen people who didn't do any other crime other than that they were dismissed from their job and not allowed to come back. So this shows you how absolutely vicious and evil the Masonic Revolution was in France. And this is true of all non-Catholic revolutions that end up run by Masons or Marxists or Nazis or whatever you call them, because it's the same crowd. They cannot be trusted in the least. There's no dialogue, there's no freedom of speech. It's completely, we're going to wipe you out, because they're trying to genocide the French race to establish their government. And we see this in everything they do in the next 200 years, always out to destroy their political opposition. So that makes it basically illegal to be a Catholic in France, that decree. And then the national decree And then the National Convention decrees in the same month a levy of 300,000 men, a forced levy. So they needed troops to defend themselves against all the other crowns of Europe who start entering into war with the Republic because they see this government is completely evil and demonic, so it has to be crushed.
Yep. In the audiobook I have embedded into the show page, folks, The French Revolution, The Rising of the Vendee by Michael Davies. He says the Vendee is called the Last Crusade. What's your thoughts?
Well, and it's not a crusade in the sense of there was no head of there was no church leader leading it, or it was not decreed. But it is a Catholic attempt to defend itself. And I think you'd have to say what happened in Mexico during the Civil War in 1913, when you had the Catholics of Western Mexico rise up, the Cristeros. That was a Catholic movement too. But in this one, what is most notable is that it's a lay movement. There's no clergy or bishops involved. The Pope didn't come out and say and bless them. They were fighting for God on their own, and because the clergy had apostatized mostly. And if there were dusts and priests involved, there were no bishops involved. Very much a lot today, because today in most Western countries, the bishops have all succumbed to the government. They've all betrayed Jesus Christ. They've all betrayed the faithful. They've all closed down their parishes or churches to some extent. And the few good clergy there are priests, but there's no bishops among them. Okay. And you could cite me all the good bishops out there, but they all went along with it. Okay.
Yeah.
So stop pretending that these people are men of God. They're not men of God. A man of God would have resisted in every way the force of the state against the church. So these, we're looking at Catholics here that are wonderful here at the Vendee. We're about to see Catholics who give a wonderful example of how you need to take a stand and defend yourself and use your rights to bear arms and work together. Okay. And you cannot listen to these talking heads, these people who were nobody 10 years ago that came out of the woodwork and telling you obey the system. People like Skojek, Taylor Marshall, they're absolute traitors. Don't listen to these people. They're not Catholic. When I was a boy, no one listened to someone who's a nobody. First of all, you shouldn't listen to laymen, okay? Second of all, you shouldn't listen to people who tell you to obey the government and not the religion. Third, you shouldn't listen to converts. A convert should shut up for the rest of his life and be a Catholic, okay? Just because you're converted doesn't make you have a high status in the church. That's absolutely ridiculous. Even St. Paul, who was converted by a vision of a presence of Christ himself, shut his mouth for 12 years. But these are the deep state, okay? Because they're all telling you to succumb to the government control of the church. They are traitors and they are false apostles. And there are many Catholics who have been in doing a public ministry for years. I'm talking about clergy and religious, and who didn't bend. Listen to them. Don't listen to these laymen who, you know, got $1 million and immediately flipped and stabbed Father Gruner in his memory in the back. You know, so, or these other people who just want to sell their newspaper are not going to take a stand on anything. I mean, be serious now. Come on. Let's be men. Let's stop being children. Let's stop playing games. Let's stop being politically correct. The people who praise the Vendee are many, but the people who truly imitate them are few. And of all the groups I just mentioned, none of them, okay, those people would have all gone along with the government and all gone along with the juring clergy and said, well, it makes no difference whether you go to juring clergy or not juring clergy, okay? So you have to take a stand, otherwise you will be annihilated and you won't have the true faith left, okay? I told people this before the lockdown. I said, Bergoglio, now that he's closed down the churches around the world, don't think the Catholic Mass is coming back. It's never going to come back because he doesn't want it to come back. People didn't believe me. What we got is the virus Mass. So here we're going to see Catholics wonderful, how they're going to defend and take a stand. The Vendee, the Catholics of the Vendee.
Jacques Catholic. And we must point out, folks, that these men are also U.S. veterans.
Yes, many of the leaders, I mean, the generals now, we're talking about the generals and the majors of the Catholic Vendee movement, had fought in the American Revolution as allies of the colonists. And so they're not only Catholic heroes of France, they are Catholic heroes of the United States. These are true American heroes. And they went to France and went, but in France, when the revolution broke out and they saw it was anti-Christic, okay, and anti-truth, okay, that it was Masonic, they immediately took the Catholic position. So it's very different, as we said in our show. The American Revolution was not based on an attack against the church, but the French Revolution was. And here you have a Catholics who fought with us in America when it was a revolution only against a Protestant crown that was oppressing the people, but fought with Catholics in France when it was a Masonic government oppressing the church and the people, okay? So these are excellent Catholics. They understood their faith well and how to apply it in politics. And they would have never gone along with the lockdowns on the church. And, I think their main leaders merit a mention, so I'll just list the names. Charles Mercure Artus de Bonchamps, the Marquis de Bonchamps. Jacques Catherinu, the head general of the whole Vendée army. François Athanas de Charette, who had fought in the American Revolution. Maurice, the Marquis de Blaye. Louis-Marie de Salguez, Marquis de Lescure. Henri du Verger de la Rochejacquelin, a nobleman. Charles Amé de Royand, who becomes the leader of the Vendée in the South, excellent organizer, and Jean-Nicolas Dauphine. And those were the main leaders. And may their names live in the memory of all Catholics. There's a lot of, I'm surprised at the amount of information, rather objective information and beautiful artwork you can find at Wikipedia. Evidently, this is one article they tried not to twist, though maybe there's a horde of Catholics that make sure that the truth comes out. So.
What do we know about these? Is there any personal information about them?
Yeah, okay. So we'll talk a little bit about the leaders of the Vendée. So first we have to understand that the rebellion in Vendée was not organized, okay? It was not planned. It was not projected. It wasn't worked out on paper. It begins with the youth starting a riot and taking out the leader of the National Guard in one of the towns in the region. The leaders joined on afterwards when they saw the people were in favor of resisting, okay? There had been in France attempted resistance to the Masonic Revolution by Catholic leaders who would announce, let's get together and do something. But as soon as they make the announcement, the French government, the Masonic government come and arrest them, okay? So the leaders here in the Vendée were different. They didn't come out and say, we're going to resist the government. But once the people entered the streets and started the counter-revolution, then they joined. And that was very prudent from their point of view. And that's something that people should take note of, okay? So you calling for a revolution, you wait for the people that actually want it. So Charles de Beauchamps, the Marquis de Beauchamps, he was born on the 10th of May, 1760. He died the 18th of October, 1793. I'd say about half of the leaders of the Vendée were young men. This man was only 33 when he died, okay? He was the same age of Christ at the time Christ did a public ministry. And he fought in the American Civil War. And when he returned to France, he became a captain of the Grenadiers in the French Royal Army. At the outbreak of revolution, he resigns his commission and goes back to his chateau at Saint-Florent-de-Ville. He feared for his king at the outbreak of the revolution and requested to be reinstated. In the spring of 73, he was chosen a leader by the insurgents of the Vendée. And with his directives, he was able to secure a large amount of supplies from the French Royal Army and weapons that would greatly help the Catholic rising. This was a great man, and he ends up. He was mortally wounded at the Battle of Cholet in October. So the Vendee Rising begins in the spring of 1793 and is defeated by December 1793. So it's about an 8-month long thing. It happened very quickly, and people had to make decisions. They didn't spend 3 months deciding whether they're going to be a leader or not. They decided right on the spot. And this is a wonderful sign of virtue. Catholics who immediately stand to the cause and do what's right are men of excellent virtue. The kind of person that sit around and say, oh, what am I going to do? You know, let me talk about it. Let me do 10 videos on YouTube. These people don't have virtue, okay? Virtue leads you to have a knee-jerk reaction, and these are those kind of men. So that's the Marquis de Bonchamps, and a great example to Catholic young men. Then there's Jacques Cathalinot. I don't know how to pronounce that correctly. Born the 5th of January, 1759, died the 14th of July, 1793. So he was 34. He was about the same age. He was a poor man. He began his life as a peddler.
Yeah, let me.
He was very brave. Yeah, you said?
I need to cut in here.
Okay.
For some reason, we are not airing live. The radio code is not working. So we'll just keep going, and we'll have it on playback for you all to listen to and watch. So don't worry about it.
Okay. Yeah. I guess the topic is a bit too politically incorrect. So Jacques Cathalinot, who ends up to being the generalissimo, or the chief general of the Catholic forces, who was born at Le Pont de Manche in the department of Maine-et-Loire. He was well known everywhere because he was like a traveling salesman, and he was a devout Catholic. He supported the church. He was a man of indomitable fortitude, and he was disgusted by the civil constitution of the clergy that forced the clergy to submit to Masonic government, the laws of his king, Louis XVI. So he organizes a group of peasants to war against the government. He was one of the first leaders, and he was courageous. He showed an extraordinary courage in all the battles. His history goes along right with revolution, right with this Catholic counterattack. So on the 10th of March, 1793, the young people from the district of Saint-Flon-Ville rebel against the National Convention and beat and disperse the local armed force of the National Guard. Some sources say they killed the leader of the force. After learning of these events, Cathalinot left his cottage, gathered his neighbors, and convinced them that the only way to end the reign of terror was openly to take arms up and attack the Republicans, that's the Masonic government. He took the initiative to gather all able-bodied men from his village to confront the Republicans. On the 12th of March, 27 young men followed him, arming themselves in haste with any weapon they could find, and they marched on Jalais, sounding the alarm, and recruited another crowd of Catholics. So this is a man who, one day after the Catholic young people at Saint-Florent rise up against the National Guard, he's raised 27 men and he's on the road. Okay, this is a wonderful Catholic. It wasn't like he had to think about it. And this is what we have to emphasize. The use of violence is not of itself immoral. There's been a lot of propaganda put out by Masons, communists, Marxists, and to tell you that, oh, you shouldn't own a gun. Oh, you shouldn't be violent. Oh, you should not even throw a rock. Okay, that's always evil. Catholics are pacifists. We never fight back. We always submit. You know, that's false doctrine. That's not the Catholic faith. That is the voice of the serpent, not of Jesus Christ. Catholics have always taken up arms immediately when justice was violated. immediately. Okay, there wasn't even hesitation about owning weapons. You had to own. If you didn't own weapons, you weren't a man. Okay, you were some kind of like half-baked twit. Okay. However, you didn't use weapons out of mere desire of hatred or revenge. Catholics immediately took up arms to defend themselves and defend their rights and defend their clergy, defend their God, defend their king. And they weren't like they had to think about it. Okay. So it's a completely different psychology than we find constantly hammered with in the press, in the media, from the pulpits in the last 200 years. And we have to realize that we are being led by false shepherds. Okay. Because the true doctrine in this is you should immediately rise to arms. And not just you, it should be everyone in your Catholic parish. And if not, there's something seriously wrong with the faith of everyone in your parish. Okay. They have to, oh, we can do this, we'll do this. But what is the thing is, so the reign of terror is executing clergy. Okay. So it's a very serious threat. It's a lot serious threat. But Catholics, even in response to their parish being forced to shut its doors for this fake pandemic, should have risen up with arms, stand around their church with guns and said to the sheriff, if you want to stop us from saying mass, try. As they cocked their guns. That's what they should have done. And if the sheriff said, I'm going to arrest you all afterwards, they should have arrested the sheriff on the spot and put him in chains, okay? Because he has violated the Constitution in preventing freedom of religion. He is a criminal against the people. Okay? The citizenry has the right to arrest him, imprison him. They even have the right to try him and sentence him. Because when the people who are elected to office or hold power in the courts or in the legislature or in the national government do anything that's against the Constitution, they lose their authority. They are no longer your leaders. They are enemies of the people and of the state, and you have the right to immediately take action. Because if you don't immediately take action, what's happening? You're then recognizing that an enemy of the people is your superior, and you're going to negotiate with him some rights. You've just surrendered, and you've just become a member of an unconstitutional order. Okay, you haven't even fought a war of revolution or independence. You just surrendered. Okay, you cannot negotiate with people who are enemies of the Constitution. And these aren't people who said, "Oh, I made a boo-boo. Yesterday night I decreed you couldn't have freedom of religion, but I see I'm wrong, so I'll change this morning." These people have never said, "I'm sorry." Okay, never. It doesn't, and they can't just tweet it. They can't say, "Oh, this is wrong. I'm going to tweet it. This is wrong. What's going on?" But in the morning, sign the decree for that it to be done, which is the game being played out of the White House. Okay, so these Catholics weren't like that. They were sound Catholics. So they had true sound Catholic teaching. They understood the right of defense and when to use it. And Catholo will show himself to be such a brave, intelligent, quick to act, and smart leader that he becomes named by everyone as the chief commander of the forces. And his personality is what united all the Vendeans together, and his wonderful actions. So he goes on victory after victory after victory. Here's a Catholics who are not trained in military sciences at all, defeating organized military units because their faith was with them, God was with them, they were on a divine cause. And in just 2 days, he rallies 3,000 men to himself, okay? And he was called the missionary. He was so charismatic. And so by March 14, he has 3,000 men under arms. And he's joined by Jean-Nicolas Stolfet, another famous leader of the Vendeans. And they marched on the town. He first marched in the town of Chambly and captured it. Then they marched in the town of Cholet and won again. Then he was joined by the other leaders, Charles de Marquis de Bonchamp and Maurice de Elbelet. He had a huge influence on the peasants as the royalists captured Vihers and Chalons. The campaign was then interrupted because it was Easter and they all went home for Mass. So these are Catholics who were absolutely they did not even look at necessity as an excuse to celebrate Easter. On April 9th, they returned to the field under arms. They had to evacuate Chemillé and withdraw to Forgoes. But with 3,000 men, he joined Stofflet and took back Cholet, Vihers, and Chalons. He seized Beaupré on the 23rd of April and won the Battle of Thors on May 5th. Having been pushed back to La Châtellière on the 14th, he was defeated at Fontenay-le-Comte by the General Alexis Chablat on 16th of May. He then retaliated by defeating the Freemasons at Montreuil-Belleau and Saumur on the 9th of June, 1793. And let's not call them Republicans. I'm going to call them the Freemasons because that's who they were. They were not Republicans at all. So after the Battle of Saumur and the capture of the city, the Catholic forces took on such a level of importance that the royalist leaders thought it necessary to ensure the agreement of their operations and give command to one chief general. Beloved by the troops, Cathelineau was proclaimed by Louis-Marie Marquis de Lescourt and Maurice de Belay as Generalissimo of the Catholic and Royal Army to be assembled by the assembled heads of the Vendee on the 12th of June, 1793. So here's a man who's gone from being a peddler to the chief leader of all the forces in a matter of just 3 months because of his alacrity to do what is right. And he was like the moral leader of the army. He was not someone who had been a military leader. He was not someone who had been even trained in military affairs. Okay, so this is a man who had the charismatic gift of leading men and the grace of God to do it. Okay, because he was just a man of such great virtue.
Oh. Let's see. I know one was for sure in the American Revolution. That was Francois de Charette, because I remember hearing him even mention it. The actor who mentions that he was there in America fighting.
Yeah, Francois Charette did fight in the American, another one who fought in the American Revolution. I'll just end by saying Catherlou, Jacques Catherlou, his cause of beatification has been introduced. Okay, so Francois de Charette, he was born on 2nd of May, 1763. So he's only 30 years old himself, and he had been a soldier in the French Royal Army, and he served in the French Royal Navy during the American Civil War. So American Revolution, excuse me. He served under Toussaint Julien Piquet de la Motte, and he was the lieutenant of the vessel on the French 74 gunship Hercule. And following the outbreak of the French Revolution, he quit the French Navy, emigrated to Coblentz to avoid being persecuted, but returned to France, to his property, and became one of the royalist volunteers who assisted in defending Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette from physical harm during the mob attack on the Tuileries Palace on the 10th of August. He was arrested in Angers but released through the intervention of Charles-François Dumouriez. In 1793, when the Catholic forces of the Vendée rise against the Masonic government, the peasants asked Charette to be one of their leaders. He joined Jacques Cathelineau following the taking of Saumur in June of 1793 and fought in most of the battles of the Catholic and Royal Army. In 19th of December 1793, participated in the victorious Battle of Tiforgs, and after he and the Marquis Lescourt marched on Saint-Fulgent to pursue the Jean-Baptiste Kébler, who had escaped, and one of the Masonic leaders. And he fights in several battles. He's quite victorious. He was a leader of guerrilla fighters in September and the fall against the Masonic forces, capturing their camp at Saint-Christophe de l'Union near Châtillon. Chalons, but he ran out of supplies and was decisively attacked by troops of Nicholas Haxo. Trapped on the Isle of Bouin, Charette and with fellow soldiers was informed of escape route by a local to the island. Leaving behind all their guns, ammunition, horses, refugees, and wounded, Charette, Cortes, and their men swam through the marshes. By a chance stroke of luck, he met up with an army of Joly, and both him and Charette retaliated by circling Haxo, gaining back their supplies, and distracting the Masonic army from the refugees. Haxo, the Freemason, later attacked the island of Mortier with loose Tarrant, which had been taken by Charette in the month before, and promising inhabitants if they surrendered. Against Haxo's command, Tarot killed most of the men, women, and children on the island. So he was an indomitable leader, even when he was in the positions of the most poor strategic position. He was willing to risk life and limb to outmaneuver the enemy, a man of great courage. And this is a man, though, he had formal military training. And so you could call him a patron of Catholic Marines, because he served in the Navy and yet led forces and was willing to even swim through marshes to get things done. So if you're any Catholic Marine, any Marines are listening to us, or former Marines who are Catholics, this is a man to admire, Francois de Charette. He brought supplies to his starving army, and he was he wasn't the kind of commander who would leave his troops in the field and let them starve to death like Napoleon did with his army in Egypt. He returned to his forces and saw that they got supplies. He was one of the few leaders to survive the Vendee rebellion. Most of the leaders were captured in 1793 and executed shortly after. He managed to survive all the way until 1795 on the 17th of February. There was a treaty signed. The Masonic forces said they weren't going to persecute Catholics anymore. So the Catholics came out of hiding. Then they reneged. The Freemasons reneged on their part of the treaty and arrested people. So never trust a Freemason. Don't even sign a treaty with them. These people are scum, because they are just like Muslims will do. They'll sign treaties only to get time so they could attack you again or to trick you. So he ends up captured and being shot in a firing squad. He was executed at Nantes. There's a plaque erected that still stands on the spot where he was shot, and Catholics still remember him with ceremonies on the thing. So you can see even what his face looked at and his death mask there on the Wikipedia article. A great man, and one of the great military leaders of the Vendee uprising. If he had any drawbacks, it's because he was trained in the Navy and he was only a lieutenant of a ship, so he wasn't really an expert in land warfare. But he's the kind of man who French military veterans today should admire. They should not admire Napoleon. They should admire Francois Antonin de Charette, okay, who was a professional military man, and with not only in the American Revolution, but to defend the Catholics of France, his own people.
Yeah. Stofflet.
Okay, Jean-Nicole Stofflet, or Stofflet, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it. He was born the 3rd of February, 1753. So he's one of the older members. He's about 40 years old, and he doesn't get captured when the Vendee falls. Okay, he succeeds in living an extra 3 years. He was born at Bathilmont-le-Bosemont in the Meurthe de Moselle. He was the son of a miller. He was a private in the Swiss Guard. I don't know if they mean by that the Swiss Guard of the papacy. Let me see. And became a gamekeeper of the Comte de Colbert Maulevier. He joined the Vendeans when they rose against the Masonic government He served under Maurice de Elbe and fought at Fontenay-le-Comte, Cholet, Saumur, and distinguished himself in the battles of Beaupré, Laval, and Antran. He was appointed Major General of the Royalist Army, and in 1794 he succeeded Henri de la Roche-Jacquelin as Commander-in-Chief of the Catholic Army. He established his headquarters in the forest of Vincennes, but his quarrels with another Vendean leader and the defeats sustained by Vendean troops led him to give in to submission, and he accepted the terms of the Treaty of Lausanne with the National Convention. That's the one the Freemasons used to get the Catholics to surrender. He soon violated the treaty at the instigation of royalist agents, took up arms in December of the same year on behalf of the Count of Provence, from whom he had received the rank of Marshal de Camp. In his last action, he failed completely. He was taken prisoner by the Freemasons and sentenced to death by a military commission, being shot at Angers. And so this is a man who didn't give up. When the Freemasons tricked the Catholics, he came back. And perhaps, if anything, he wasn't one of the great leaders, but military men who are leaders, they need the support of Catholic society. They just can't say, follow me, and people follow. The society itself has to want liberty. The society doesn't want liberty. They could have the greatest leaders, but they're not going to win their independence because they're not willing to fight. So in the Vendee, we see that they had some great leaders because but they first showed that they were willing to fight. And this is probably one of the things that's lacking today. The rank and file Catholics are not willing to fight, and therefore they're risking losing everything, their lives and their faith. And this is something that cannot be overemphasized, that the Catholics need to rise up against any injustice against the church or against their rights, okay? Just because you think the president is your savior doesn't mean you let him strip your church of rights, lock you up in a house, take away your job, and ruin your finances. Oh, he's my savior. You know, those people are sick in the head. They're sick in the head like the Germans of Germany were sick in the head thinking that Hitler was their savior.
Mm-hmm.
At least Hitler didn't lock up Germans for 3 months and destroy the economy. Okay, even Hitler didn't do that. So,
Let's see. Charles de Beaumont de Champ.
Okay, Charles Melchior Artus de Bonchamp, the Marquis de Bonchamp.
That's some weird names.
Well, they're French names, Bonchamp. So he was born the 10th of May, 1760. He dies the 18th of October, 1793. So he's 33 years old, young too. And I mentioned him before, just briefly, but I didn't mention the end of his life. He was a man of great mercy. When Masonic troops were captured and they were going to be executed, he pardoned them so that they might live. And even though he knew they might come back to attack. So he was not a vicious man at all, and he kept to Catholic morals even to the end. He was present at the taking of Bressures, Thouars, and Fontenay-le-Comte, where he was wounded but recovered. He was mortally wounded at the Battle of Cholet in October 1793. He died the next day. In his last act, he pardoned the enemy prisoners, allowed them to be released. He was one of the best tactical leaders of the Vendees, and his death was an important victory for the Masonic forces. He was admired by Christian monarchists and revolutionaries alike. A statue of him by Pierre Jean David stands in the Catholic parish church at Saint-Florent-le-Viel. And there's a very wonderful painting of him at Wikipedia in his article, Charles Melchior Artus, Marquis de Bonchamp.
Who have we missed?
Louis Marie Salgueres de Lescour. We haven't talked about the Marquis de Lescour. So He was born the 13th of October, 1763. He died the 4th of November, 1793, 66, 1793. So here's a man who fought at the age of 27, one of the youngest participants in the Catholic uprising. He held the rank of general. He was educated, he was born at Versailles and educated in the French military school, the École Militaire. So he was he was an officer in the French Royal Army, highly trained. He left the school at the age of 16. He was in command of a company of cavalry in the Regiment de Royal Picmont in 1791. He married his cousin, the Victoire de la Donatien de la Roche-Jacqueline, who was also a cousin of Henri de la Roche-Jacqueline, who we'll speak of next, another hero of the Vendee. He was opposed to the ideas of the revolution. He fled France in 1791, but soon returned. He took part in the defense of the Tuileries Palace against the mob. And then the day after, he was forced to leave the capital, and he fled to Clisson. When the Catholics rose in the Vendee, he was currently under arrest and imprisoned with his family. He was set free by the Catholic forces and became one of their leaders. He fought at Thouars in May of 1793. At the Battle of Fontenay-le-Comte, he was first to enter the city and free the Vendean prisoners inside. A very courageous man and knew exactly what to do in the spot of a battle. He was wounded at the Battle of Saumur in June, and after unsuccessful attack on Nantes, he joined forces with La Roche-Jacqueline and tried in vain to rally the troops the dispersed troops of the Catholic Royal Army. He was pursued by the Masonic General Francois Joseph Westermann, but finally defeated him at Tiforges and Cholet on the 19th of December 1793. 19th of September, remember, is the day Our Lady comes at La Salette. Or that is celebrated for her feast day at La Salette. He was seriously wounded by a bullet to the head at Tiforges. The struggle was then concentrated around Chatignon, which at time was taken and then lost by the Masonic forces. And he was killed near the chateau of La Chambée between Aunay and Fougeas. So this is a man who was in the thick of battle, was wounded, did not give up, and who fought. He was one of the main generals of the Catholic forces, and he was the only one with formal military training in the academy. So the Marquis de Lescourt, Louis Marie.
Didn't they have any special names for their cannons?
Special names for their cannons. They might have. Have you heard that well, see, one of the important things, before we talk about the names of the cannon, one of the important things in the Vendee uprising was to capture military ordnance. And ordnance is a term in English which means cannonry, okay, military equipment. And it was essential in battle to have cavalry, artillery, and infantry. And the infantry had to have rifles and ammunition. But the cannons were very important, either to defend cities or if they're field artillery. They could win or lose a battle, how you had them positioned and where you had them positioned. So, but I'm not familiar they had names for them. Do you have a source on that, AJ?
It comes from the movie The War of the Vendee. It's the first cannon they captured is just a normal size one. They called it the missionary.
Yeah, what we don't the Catholics of old were very lively. They gave names to swords. They gave names to cannons. They gave names to ships, and that helped them on the quick of battle be able to name what cannon needs to be brought up. Bring up the missionary, for example. It's something that I don't know if it's done in modern times of naming artillery, but back in those days, a lot of cannon was produced piece by piece. So every cannon was different from the others. They weren't mass produced, and so they weren't all the same caliber, weight, or even abilities. There's light field artillery, which is designed to be used against troops. There are heavy bombards designed to bring down walls. There's siege artillery designed to shoot almost vertically up to go over walls and enter cities. Different kinds of artillery. So the missionary. That's interesting.
And the largest one of all, one of the just normal soldiers was asked, "What do you want to name this big thing?" He's like, "Name it after my mother-in-law, the one who breathes fire."
Mm-hmm. There were other great Vendéan leaders we haven't yet mentioned: Charles Aimé de Royande, Henri du Vergier de la Roche-Jacquelin, and Maurice de L'Elbée. But we don't have to go through all of them. Great men who led, but we need to not forget that the Catholic uprising was not aristocratic. It was the masses of Catholic people, people whose names we do not know and perhaps shall never be known. Tens of thousands, more than 130,000 Catholics rose up, and as much as maybe 300,000 were genocided by the Masonic forces in retaliation for daring to oppose the Masonic Revolution. And the French government nearly lost control of the situation. And this was one tiny little province in France. If all the Catholics in all the provinces of France had done this, the revolution would have never gotten off the ground. It would have been crushed. And France would be Catholic today, and the entire French colonial empire would be Catholic. And you wouldn't have all these evil treaties between France and Russia, which precipitated the First World War. And all these other conflicts that the French have promoted by promoting Freemasonry around the world. So it's the failure of Catholics to defend their faith in the French Revolution, for the most part, not the Vendéans, who have led to so many other evils. So when you're quiet and you allow your parish to be shut down by the government, you are causing a series and a cascade of historic events that will lead to even greater evil because you're doing nothing now. So this is one of the great lessons the Vendées do. Where the Vendées, though they weren't successful, ultimately, they've given a wonderful example for Catholics until the end of time, which all those people who cooperated with the revolution, they'll never be remembered. They went to hell and they'll burn for all eternity because they didn't have the love of Christ to stand up and defend his church. And that's the big difference. And that's how it's important to be active in your faith and not passive with injustices from the government.
Let's see here. Now we have the threat from the white Irish American who claims to be black, Sean King, threatening to attack the churches and stuff. And well, he got a pretty strong response from the Polish and Michigan. They're like, I don't think so.
Yeah, that great group of Catholic men there in the parish in Michigan who showed that they're willing to defend their parish. We'd love to have them on the radio and talk about what inspired them and what inspires them and how they're organized and what they plan to do or not do. That would be great. And because, but just to show your pictures on the internet isn't sufficient, okay?
Yeah.
So, you have to take a stand and insist on defending your rights.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have a local young priest who is worried about it, and the people around here are saying, "Oh, we'll be there with arms." And he's like, "My dad's been asking, is it lawful or sinful to, to do this?" And I was like, "No." And today's show,
it's certainly not. It's a virtue. You will be blessed by God. So
yeah. So we're hoping that if the parish office at St. Florian near Detroit will get back to us because it's their parish. And I sent them the photo of the guys who were out front protecting it. I was like, "We want to talk to those guys. Pass along this message." So far, nothing.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, maybe the parish office won't pass it along.
Now, people, I know, I was like, and others are like, "Why don't you go on to Paris and finish them off?"
Okay, so you have to understand the Vendee, as comparison to the entire territory of France, is probably not even 1%. Okay, and 100 and something like 130,000 Catholics rose up, but they weren't military troops; they were just common people. So they weren't trained. A lot of them did serve voluntarily, and they did raise a lot of forces, but the French government could raise 300,000 over all of France quite easily, and they only had 130,000. So, and the French government could train, not the French government, the Masonic government had control of the military institutions so they could train their forces, whereas the Vendeans couldn't. Matter of fact, the Vendeans were only defeated when a French army in Germany was surrounded by the Prussians and surrendered, and they all swore an oath they couldn't fight against Prussia for like 3 years. So the Masonic government, DVSDR, said, well, they swore an oath against the Prussians, but not against the Vendeans. So they moved the forces, which were hardened veterans, to attack the Catholics. And once the Vendeans were defeated, the Masonic government went through the province, slaughtering everyone. It doesn't matter you were pro-government or against government. They went out to genocide everyone in the province because they knew that these people would rise up again. And even after being reduced about a third of their population because they were just slaughtering everyone, they rose up in subsequent years. And even to this day, they're strong Catholics. They have a lot of ancestors who are saints and undoubtedly are in heaven for having been killed for their faith. The sad thing is the church has only, I think, beatified 96 of them. Okay, all of them that died should be beatified, because you don't do wrong when you're taking up arms to defend yourself, even if you have to kill your enemy. That's not a sin. That's a virtue, because it's directed for defending God and your rightful king. Okay, and that is a virtue. Greater love no man has, that he risked his life for his friends. So how much more for his God and his king? And so, but since times of the French Revolution, we've had weak and cowardly clergy, even in Rome. So they haven't had the courage to come out and say these people were, and bless what these people did, and make some statements that are strong and make it quite clear that Catholics should take up arms. If they did, we wouldn't be in our situation right now, but they don't, because they just want surrender and more surrender.
Why does no one call it a genocide?
Okay, in 1986, one French scholar looking over what happened called it genocide. The French historian Renaud Sacher, in his book A French Genocide, The Vendée, in 1986, laid out the charge. And this made the Freemasons of France go absolutely bonkers. And if you look at articles about genocide on Wikipedia, you almost never find long controversies. Oh, it's absolutely certain there was a Jewish genocide. There's no controversy at all, you know. But on this one, they go in lengths trying to debunk it and to saying there wasn't a genocide. Well, when you send troops to the countryside to kill everyone, that's genocide.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't genocide in the sense of it's not directed against a certain ethnicity, but this was directed against Catholics in a province. So there's no Masonic category for genociding Christians, so they say it's not genocide. But that's just a word game. It was genocide. It was intended to eliminate a group of people who did not want the Masonic government of France, and who were not hoodwinked by the lies of the Masonic Revolution, and who were not seduced by the vices and evils and crimes of the French, of the Masonic Revolution in France, and who still were going to resist. And yeah, it was genocide without a doubt. It's one of the not the only thing. It's not this. It's not the first genocide. We have to remember that there's been tens, hundreds of thousands of Catholics in England who, since the time of the revolt of Henry VIII, were killed because they were Catholic. Catholics in Cornwall, Catholics in Wales, Catholics in York. There were several uprisings, Catholics doing similar things, and they were all slaughtered. And then same thing in Germany in the Protestant Reformation. Tens of thousands of Catholics, hundreds of thousands killed. I think in the 30 Years' War, something like 15 million, half the population of Germany was killed, and probably half of that was Catholic. So millions of Catholics have been killed in Western Europe because they were Catholic by governments who did not want it. And this is not just the only group, okay? So, and this is not the first time. It's the one in most recent memory in Western Europe. We could talk about all the tens of thousands of Catholics and clergy who were killed in the Spanish Revolution when the communists tried to take over the government. And Franco fought, Franco and the, I don't know if you called his forces the nationalists, sought to defend Spain, Catholic Spain, from godless atheism. And they got a lot of criticism to that, but they were fighting an honest and just war, okay? And other forces were just butchering clergy, and so something had to be done. So this is not the only group. So probably because here in the United States we have such a strong, I should say in the United States we have such a big number of Catholics of French descent that what happened in the Vendee is well known. But if we had more Catholics from Spain, we'd know more about the Spanish Civil War and what the brave things Catholics did there, because the Catholics won in the Spanish Civil War. Mm-hmm. And but it was the communists in America who fought with the communists in Spain against the Catholics in France. So in the U.S., if you read anything about the Spanish Civil War, it's always the evil Catholics. Evil Franco, It's just evil, 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 evil. Why? Because the Catholics won, therefore they're evil. The Catholics opposed communism, therefore they're evil. They don't want Catholics to know what happened in the Spanish Civil War because that's where Catholics won. They'll tolerate us talking about the Vendee because Catholics lost in the Vendee. And they didn't have much time to organize, but they need to have organized better than they did. Their supply lines, their arms manufacturing, their government. They should have sent out ambassadors to Spain, to the United States, to the papacy, to England, and to other crowns of Europe seeking military help because they controlled a good portion of the coast and they could have been a good beachhead for the invasion of France by foreign powers. They didn't have time to do that. They were just reacting moment after moment, and that was probably their downfall. They didn't have a secondary organization. They weren't looking to the future of building a Catholic independent state, and they were just trying to put troops in the field and defend themselves. But at the same time, 1% of a country, how does it defend against 99% that has apostatized and is willing to serve the oppression and conquest of that one? It's hard to do. So, and this is a lesson in the United States. If a revolution should break out, a Marxist revolution in the United States, don't think of starting a Catholic resistance in a state that is all Marxist. You will just be eliminated, okay? You have to go to a state that's already 100% in favor of liberty and assist there, because otherwise you'll be wiped out. And unless the states resisting the Marxist takeover are a large part of the country, they will be defeated. Okay, because it's just a matter of who controls how much territory and all the resources. So this is the lesson of the Vendee. They were great, they were virtuous, but they were only reacting. They weren't planning in advance. They weren't well organized in other matters. The whole Catholic population did rise up, and that's great, but it wasn't, it was reactionary, meaning they were only reacting to what was happening. They weren't deciding for themselves what kind of strategic decisions to make to conquer territory, take it back, secure their forces, and convince Catholics to join them. They did try to convince some Catholics in Brittany to join them, but the Bretons stayed in their homes and didn't fight. And that was one of the great betrayals of the Bretons, who also known for being strong Catholics. But Brittany today has lost the faith, but the Vendee is still devoutly Catholic. So the blood of martyrs is the seed of Christians.
That area that swore to that sole clergy constitution is what, Lords and La Salette.
So yeah, if you look at a map of the percentage of clergy who apostatized and swore allegiance to the Masonic government in France, some of the highest provinces are two, where Our Lady appears at Lourdes and where Our Lady appeared at La Salette. So Our Lady didn't go to the most faithful parts of France. She didn't appear to the Vendéens. She went to the worst, most corrupt parts of France. And that's why you see Bernadette being persecuted by the clergy, and why you see the little children at La Salette being persecuted by the clergy, because they were in regions where the clergy were really rotten. Okay. And that shows something about Our Lady's mercy too. And that she decided to at least try to bring the faith back. But at La Salette today and at Lourdes today, there's a great strong faith in those towns and in the surrounding regions. So Our Lady, in a way, has converted back at least those two parts of France.
Yeah. Well, what will it take for them to all be join those small few are beatified and finally canonized?
We need a Catholic Pope. We need someone who rejects completely all the false narrative of the revolution, of Freemasonry, of communism. I think, need a religious as the next Pope, because the church has been ruined by diocesan clergy. In the last 200 years, all the popes have been diocesan clergy, and they've ruined the church. And we need men with spine who have been trained and who haven't given in to any of these errors. Because only in a monastery, we're reading the lives of the saints and the writings of the saints, and you completely exclude all the errors of the world. Only in a monastery like that you can get the intellectual formation to be a true man of God. And that's why these Catholics of the Vendée, as well as the Catholics of the Spanish Civil War and the Catholics of Mexico, the Cristeros. I don't talk about the few who have been beatified or canonized. I talk about the masses who rose. They also need due praise, because in many ways they were more heroic, because they were nobodies and risked everything and lost their lives, and no one remembers them.
I want to close out now with let's see, get close to the mic here. Today's show is very important to all of us. We speak of our forgotten heroes, or heroes, the illegal government of the revolution that wants us to forget. It was Catholic farmers, merchants, peasants who had the so-called mighty army of the revolution to its knees. They saw their rights being taken away, including that of religion. Yesterday, you rightly deplored the Turkish government in turning the great Basilica of Hagia Sophia from a museum back into a mosque. I have a feeling if the current French president wanted to, he would do the same to our historic churches and basilicas in France and Paris. Thankfully, he will make sure the Notre Dame de Paris will be restored to its Gothic design. As the 45th great-grandson of King Hugh of Capet, 63rd great-grandson of Eudes I, and great-grandson, nephew to the kings of France and cousin to the little king, King Louis XVII. I support you. I remember and promote always the memory of the great martyrs of the Vendee. I urge you to speak again in public on the martyrs of the Vendee and currently support them, Louis Alphonse de Bourbon. This way, we continue their memory and speak of them often. I speak to you every day on radio and video, Monday through Saturday, at ordo-militaris.net, and sharing forgotten history in the Catholic faith and the work of Ordo Militaris Catholicus. Subscribe to my YouTube or BitChute channel. The subscribe buttons are found at the bottom of the website in large images. What's your thoughts?
This has been a great program. It gives us a lot of examples. If I could conclude, I would speak to all Catholic fathers and all Catholic men. I would say the way the world is going today, you have a grave duty to get a license and to buy a gun, store it properly, follow the laws, and learn to use it. Adult women too, who want to, should do the same. And I'm talking about all able-bodied Catholic men. Okay, they should all own at least 1 or 2 guns and store them properly, because the purge, I think, is coming. I think the globalists know they have to get rid of us to have their evil futuristic world. And so there'll come a time where you have a duty to defend yourself and your loved ones. Unless you have a gun and know how to use it, you won't be able to fulfill that duty. So that the need is here now, and now you can prepare. So in the countries where you can get a license and buy as many guns and ammo as you can. I'm not saying start a revolution, but start reading the examples of the Catholics of the Vendee, of the Spanish Civil War, of the Cristeros of Mexico, and network with other Catholics. So if necessity requires that you take up arms to defend yourselves individually or in groups, you're ready to do it, okay? It's perfectly legitimate and perfectly legal. Because once the government turns on its people, it's not your government. You have no longer any obligation to follow any of its laws, pay any of its taxes. So this is a question of the changes of governments, the changes of civilizations, the morality during a revolution or during a genocide. You have to take actions that are absolutely necessary, and you have to do them quickly, and you have to be ready to do them. So I encourage all Catholic men to prepare themselves, because we are not entering an age of brilliance and light. We're entering a very dark and turbulent age ahead, because it's pretty clear that the governments of the West no longer want peace. They no longer want our liberty, and they no longer want us to have freedom of religion.
Yep. Well said. Well, I also want to apologize for our server, our host, whatever we call it, stopping on us early mid show. And thank you to our listeners from the Crusade channel for telling us it stopped. And once I looked up at our dashboard of our radio station, I'm like, why is it on 0? I'm on the page. So we'll be looking for something else. But we'll still be doing video, and hopefully we can upload audio to Mixcloud.
Yeah, hopefully this one doesn't take like 12 hours to process like our show on Margaret Sanger did.
Yeah.
Yeah. It usually takes just a few minutes, but the show on Margaret Sanger took 12 hours because someone at Mixcloud was really terrified by what we were saying. So I recommend you listen to that program too. So it must be full of total truth. It is full of total truth. I can affirm that.
Yeah. Tomorrow, Monday, we are doing our weekly update on terrorism. Some new stuff in Italy. Scary thing in Denmark, and a few other places we have articles from. And we'll also be talking about what is Ordo Militaris.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yep. So have a great weekend, folks. This is Ordo Militaris Radio, signing off. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.